Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to talk about quite an important book about Enochian magic. This book was written by Aleister Crowley, and I've got an edition here that I think is one of the best editions of this book that I've seen at all for a while. So I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And for people who aren't familiar with Enochian magic, it is the system of magic that was created by the magician John Dee. And here is a book with a picture on the cover of John Dee, who was a famous English magician from the Elizabethan period in England. And John Dee was the first magician to create a system of magic that involved contact with angels. So he also created the Enochian alphabet, and he called this system of magic after the biblical figure of Enoch, who was quite an important figure from the Bible. So that's why the system of magic is called Enochian Magick. And John Dee was a major influence on Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley was very impressed with John Dee and his methods of magic and just the whole creation of Enochian magic. So he was a very big influence on Aleister Crowley. This book about John Dee I have already reviewed on my channel. So if people want to look into this book, it would most likely be either in the playlist of magical books or the playlist of esoteric books on my channel. So you could look into that if you're interested. Now for this book by Aleister Crowley, it's actually got two books in here. This book is published by Weiser, and there is an introduction by Lon Milo Duquette. It's called The Practice of Enochian Magick, and I'm really glad to have this book because there are two books written by Aleister Crowley in particular that he regarded as his two most important books. One of them is the Book of the Law, and the second one is The Vision and the Voice. And The Vision and the Voice is in this book. And the Book of the Law is relatively easy to get, but The Vision and the Voice is not as easy to find. So I'm really pleased to have this book, which contains The Vision and the Voice in here, because it's all about Enochian magic. And I wanted to tell people about this today for people who are interested. This book had a different title, and it was originally published in 2012. This is the updated 2019 edition. So for people who are interested, it's a great book. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that are in this book. I hope you'll excuse my post-it notes that are in here, but I've got things marked to show. There are two books in here. Now, you can see this is the Enochian alphabet here. And The vision and the voice is the creation of the 30 ethers or airs that were received by Crowley around the same time as the Book of the Law, that around the same time that he received that teaching. So I'm going to talk about what's in here, and for example, when I was showing the Enochian alphabet there is a full table of the 30 ethers. They're all numbered from 1 to 30. There is the divisions and the angels associated. They're all listed here from 1 to 30. So you've also got here the 4 watchtowers that are governed by each of the 4 directions and the 4 elements. And you've got the sigil, famous sigil here as well. So I'm just going to talk about what's in here. There's part 1 and part 2, because the vision and the voice is part 2, is the second book in this. But both of these books are absolutely by Aleister Crowley, and there is an introduction that's really worthwhile by Lon Milo Duquette in the front of the book, which is really worth reading for people who want some background about Enochian magic and what it is. So I'm just going to talk, as I said, about what is in this book. So the first book, part 1, this is the first book written by Crowley, and this is his subtitle: A Brief Abstract of the Symbolic Representation of the Universe, derived by Dr. John Dee through the scrying of Sir Edward Kelley. So this is really Crowley's commentary on the system of 18 calls that were received by John Dee. And there were 18 calls that were obtained by scrying. And so in this first book, there are the descriptions of the 18 calls that were really dictated to John Dee. They were recorded by John Dee and Edward Kelley, who was his assistant. So this first book is commentating on that, the importance of that. And then the second book is The Vision and the Voice, and it's a really good idea to look at this first book first, because it's a good introduction to why Crowley wanted to write his own calls or ethers. He wanted to do his own, because he felt it was sort of fairly well known or regarded or thought that the 18 calls of John Dee were not complete, that there were 18 but they weren't completed. So that is why The Vision and the Voice is Crowley's reception of 30 an additional 30 ethers, and that, that totals up to 48 in all. But the Crowley 30 ethers are really considered separate in the vision and the voice. So I'm just having a look here a bit further in this first book, just to see what else I could show you for now. Yeah, so what Crowley does with this is he talks about, he groups these together into 48 by talking about his 30 ethers first in the first book, and then he calls it part 2 in the book, the 48 calls or keys. So the first 18, of course, are the John Kelley ones, and he just they're all recorded here. And to begin with, there is the opening of the portal. Then there is the 18 keys, all from 1 to 18. And then that section finishes. Then the call of the 30 ethers begins. And they're all listed here. They're listed in several tables in this book, but there's the 1 to 30 of the 30 ethers of Crowley. And this is all in the first book. So he wants to introduce the whole 48, 30 of which are his and 18 of John Dee's. So he goes into that. So he's done this introduction in the first book. Then the second book is the vision and the voice being of the angels of the 30 ethers. So this is the book 2. So instead of going from 1 to 18, which he did with the John Dee calls, instead, being Crowley, he has to do something different, so he starts with the 30th ether and goes backwards. So he starts with the 30th ether and states the name. So he goes all the way from 30 to number 1, and there is information on all of these, and it's all written what he actually received in the information that was channeled to him. So it's really interesting to read. Crowley was such a great writer. It's always fascinating to read his writings. So they're very descriptive, and they're quite inspiring. I love Crowley's writings, but the vision and the voice, I think it's really quite beautiful and quite inspirational. Some of the symbolism I don't totally agree with, some of the symbolism, and if you get this book you might be able to tell which particular symbols I don't quite agree with, but they need to be put into context. I'm fairly sure this was written, the vision and the voice was written around 1909, it's around that time. So you need to put that into historical context, sort of just some of the social attitudes that were around at the time. I'm not making excuses for Crowley or anything like that. It's really just it's not in regard to the writing, really. It's in regard to some of the symbolism. That's all. And anyway, then he goes all the way down to from 30 to number 1, the first ether. Yes, when he gets to the first ether, I mean, this was, you know, he not only writes the date of when it's received, but that's why it's called the vision and the voice, but even the actual time, and the place. So these were around about 1909. Then at the end of all that, there is a really good summary, which he calls a comment on the natures of the ethers. And same thing again, he goes, there's a tiny little sentence or paragraph, small paragraph for each of the ethers, starting with number 30, and going all the way to number 1. And I really like that too, because it's a great summary of the 30 ethers. That's great. And then you've got an elemental diagram here. So you've got the 4 elements and the 4 watchtowers. And all of that is absolutely based on the magic writings, formulas and methods of John Dee. So this is why John Dee was such a huge influence on Aleister Crowley. So this book is about 240 pages, but it's a great book. Anyone who wants a foundational knowledge and background of Enochian magic, but also to have a copy of The Vision and the Voice. And the first book is worthwhile too, the first book that's in here as well, because it's a great introduction to the whole thing. Because The Vision and the Voice is such an important Crowley book, and I can see why it is, and why Crowley regarded The Vision and the Voice as important as the Book of the Law. So for people who are interested in Enochian magic, or just want to find out, you know, all the foundational knowledge about Enochian magic, it's worth getting. And also if you want a copy of The Vision and the Voice, this is also really worthwhile getting. So I wanted to tell people about this today for people who are interested. So I'll put some information below the video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.